Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're going to be making a drill press table. Well, it's been many years since I've made a drill press table because once you make one, what's the point of making more? However, as you all know, I replaced my drill press with the Rikon variable speed, and now I need a new drill press table. Now my old table was 30 inches by 16. I want to reduce that, and I think I'm going to reduce it to 24 inches. Now looking at the distance here going to the back of our drill press post, giving myself a little more stability, I think I'm going to be looking at about 14 inches. First thing we're going to do is we need some 3/4 inch plywood, and we want to laminate the two pieces together. So before we do anything, we're going to cut it a little oversized and then glue them together to make one piece that is 1.5 inches thick. And just remember guys, for something this size, there's nothing wrong with putting it in your bench vise and clamping it down and really getting a good adhesion there. So you've got a bench vise, use it. Well, truth be told, it's the next morning and we have left this overnight. So we can remove all of these clamps now that it's completely dried up, and we will cut it to its final dimensions of 14 by 24. Well, all in all, we want our new table to extend about 1 inch over our stock one. And of course, we can't do that because the column of our drill press is in the way. So I've taken some measurements, and what I'm going to need is a 3-inch wide recess cut out of here. And in order to get the table situated back far enough how I want it, it needs to be 2 inches deep. So for that, we're going to cut it on the bandsaw. Well, after marking it out, I have decided that I would like this to be a little bigger. I checked it and it's just a little too tight for my liking. So no problem, we're just going to make some adjustments here, and once we get those made, we can cut it. I've adjusted this, I've extended it 1 more inch, so this actually ended up to be a 4-inch wide recess in our table. Well, we're just going to do a quick dry fit to see if this is how we want it. Before we go any further, you just need to make sure that your recess is deep enough and that sort of thing. We don't want the table touching tight to our column, but we're going to leave probably about a 1/4 inch gap. Then we can take some measurements in the front to make sure that we have the overhang that we want on our table. Well, I only wanted about a 1 inch overhang, and I actually have 1.5 inches. And you know what? To be completely honest, I'm just fine with that. It doesn't look out of place. It doesn't overhang the cabinet too far, so I'm not going to be walking into it. It seems like it's the right size for what I have here. So lining it up just roughly, we're not going to go too crazy on the alignment just yet. I'm just going to take a pencil and we're going to mark around the perimeter of our stock drill press table, just so we have a rough idea where our positioning will be when we attach it to the drill press. Well, the tracing of that stock drill press table was nothing more than a rough layout. And now we will place a center line here and do our best, if I don't drop my pencil, do our best to line this up 100% perfectly. Now, why did I draw from both sides? Because there is a possibility that it is off or not exactly 24 inches, and that would be the case because I actually got a double line here, so that's All right, it still allows us to line everything up. Well, now removing our original drill press table from the drill press, we're now going to use that center line to center our table on here. And you can see that we're actually a little off. I was too far to one side, but that's okay. That's why it's just a rough mark to see where we want it. It's more for the depth than it is for the side to side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to square this up on here, make sure that it's exactly centered, double check, triple check your measurements, and once we get that done and we're happy with the placement, we're going to trace out the holes in our drill press table as well as the outer perimeter. Well, we now need to measure out from the center line in such a way so that we can have some slack here. And slack for what? We're going to be installing some threaded inserts. So for mine, I'm just going to come out, it's 2 7/8 of an inch out from the center. That looks to be about the right measurement in order to have those threaded inserts in the right position. So I'll just use a square here and mark it on both of the openings. And what we're going to do is I'm going to then measure across each one to center it on that mark. And then once we get all the marks done and center punched, we're going to drill a hole that will accept our threaded inserts. In my case, my inserts require a 3/8 of an inch hole. We're not going to go all the way through. Be very careful with this. We're only going to go through probably about 1/2 to 3/4 of the way, just a little more than what we need in order to install the insert. Well, with most drill press tables, as far as the stock one goes, this is the sort of underneath setup. They put all of these ribs here for strength and to avoid any kind of warping of the cast iron, but there's these huge gaps here where we want to bolt in, and that's not going to be acceptable because we'll probably be using either bolts or small jig knobs to hold this in place. So what I need to do is take careful measurements of these spaces here, and we're going to make a 3/4 inch insert that will fit into each one of these areas. Now with all of them made, I'm going to fine tune them because some of them are a little tighter than I would like this one. So I'm going to fine tune them to fit, and then we're going to drill a 3/8 through hole in each one of these that will coincide with the hole that is drilled for our inserts. And with those 4 inserts in place, we will get some jig knobs, I believe, and we're going to do a test fit of actually mounting this onto our drill press. Well, I checked through my stock and I didn't have the size of jig knobs or the type that I wanted. So I decided to switch it up, and what I've done is I've cut some 3-inch lengths of 1/4 threaded rod, and we'll just thread those into the inserts here that are in the table until they bottom out. You don't need to crank on them, that's not necessary. In fact, you can, even if you want, put them in and then back them off 1/4 of a turn. But once you get them in there, then we'll just do a test fit with the jig knobs and make sure that everything lines up and that it fits properly on our drill press. Well, as rock solid as this is, and you could leave it like this, it is not exactly as versatile as I would like, because a lot of the work that I like to do involves a fence. And for that, I want to use some T-track. So what I have here is some 1/4 inch T-track, and we're going to have to cut some dados that are going to house these T-tracks for our fence to ride in. For that, I think I'm going to use the router table. Well, I've taken some careful measurements, and it looks like the size of a dado that we need in our tabletop will be 3/4 of an inch wide and 3/8 of an inch deep. It's important that you get the depth right, because if not, you'll have your aluminum T-track too proud of your table surface, and it's going to interfere with your work. If you have it too low while you're sliding your work across, working on that sort of thing, it can hook on the divot that you've created by making too deep of a dado. So you want to be careful with that. I've decided that I want 4 tracks on my tabletop. I want one just like this at 3 inches in, and that will be for my fence. I want another one over here at 3 inches in, and that will be for the other side of my fence. But as well, at 7 inches in from each edge, I want a secondary one on each side. And that will be for accessories, things like hold downs and clamps and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to do a little bit of layout here, and all we're going to do is at the 3 inch mark, we're going to place a pretty little line there. And then as a reference point, we're just going to mark our 3/4 of an inch wide dado. So that will be at 3 3/4. And we'll do that on the other side as well. And then we will mark our one 7 inches in as well, which will be just like this, 7 inches in, and then 7 3/4 to mark the thickness of our dado. Now, if you are adjusting things on yours and adjusting your tracks to suit your own needs, that is perfectly fine, and I would expect that you do that. But something that you want to make sure of is that your lines that you're drawing or your dados that you're going to cut don't interfere or don't coincide with any one of these 4 holes. You want them to be nowhere near it. I've checked and we're fine here. And also something to keep in mind, you really don't have to mark both sides. Because they're symmetrical, we only really need to mark one side, but I've marked both just as a reference so I can double check to make sure nothing's screwed up. Well, if you think that you're good enough to do it first shot without any testing, well, you know what, I applaud you. As for me, I don't have that much confidence in my ability. So what I'm going to do is I've got a 3/4 inch straight cutting bit here in the router table. I have it raised to 3/8 of an inch, and I have a test piece here. It's just a scrap of MDF, and I'm going to run it through and then test my track in it for height. From there, I can fine tune and make sure that everything is perfect before I run my good piece through. Now, it's no big deal about the distance to the fence. We have a lot of wiggle room for that. If you accidentally route that at 3 1/4 inches in from the end, it's not going to destroy your project. However, if you route the groove too deep, you're going to have a problem. If it's too wide, you're going to have a problem. So let's get this test cut done. The width is beautiful. The width is nice and tight. However, it's not quite deep enough. So if this would have been my real project, I could have corrected it by raising it a bit, but it's a good thing that we test it. So I'm going to make the adjustments, do another test cut on this piece of scrap, and then we're going to route the dados in our actual table itself. Well, all of the dados are done, and now all we're going to do is cut our track to length, which, if you remember, was 14 inches. We're going to cut it to length, and then we're going to put it in place in each of our tracks, just friction fit, and from there, we're going to be drilling and countersinking some number 6 screws just to hold them really securely in place. Now guys, if you're wondering how to cut these and how to cut them nice and square and straight, I use the table saw, believe it or not. It does a fine job. You use a finer tooth blade, and there's no problem cutting an aluminum bar on the table saw. However, I have a saw stop, and if you have a saw stop, don't forget to disable the safety feature. If you don't disable the safety feature and try to cut the aluminum, I'm telling you, you're going to have one heck of a scare, and you're going to have one heck of an expense as you have to replace the blade, the brake, and your underwear. Well, I've drilled and countersunk the holes through here every 2 inches. And at this point, we're going to lay it in the tracks, and we're going to screw them in using some number 4 screws. Now, truth be told, even though all of that test cutting and all of that stuff, I still wasn't happy with the depth of these tracks and hand sanded every single dado to get them to the levels that I wanted. And with all of our T-tracks installed, I've gone around each of the edges and taken off any sharp corners just to make it a little softer here so it's not such a sharp, crisp, finger cutting edge. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today, but we've made some really great progress on the project. Now, there's a lot more to come on this, and we're going to get into that next week on the show. So hopefully you've enjoyed the first part, and hopefully you're going to try this yourself. And I also hope that you're going to join me next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.